Hello everybody, this is Shane with Shane's Books and Review. I hope that you are having a wonderful day today, and welcome back. Thanks for coming by to check things out. Now, this will be the last installment for the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, wrote by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And its publications were all in the 1893 era. So what are the three we're going to be talking about today? We will be talking about The Adventure of the Greek Interpreter, followed by The Adventure of the Naval Treaty, and then, last and certainly not least, The Final Problem. Upon opening in the first one, which was The Adventure of the Greek Interpreter, Watson and Sherlock are in a aimless summer evening, just kind of discussing a few random things. The story opens up with Watson, of course, reminding us that in all the years of him being with Sherlock, that he hasn't really talked about his family. He hasn't talked about where he's come from, and in fact kind of steers away from it. And in this one we meet Mycroft, which is Sherlock's brother. And Sherlock describes his brother as being someone that is superior in deductionary reasoning from himself. And Watson, of course, asks the obvious question, well, you're this good at doing stuff, figuring things out. If you are so frightening good at all this, why isn't your brother, if he's better than you are at this, a unstoppable force in crime detection or wherever he's at? And the answer pretty much comes out, he's lazy. He doesn't want to get off his butt. So I can appreciate that in a way, because I just can't. It's funny. However, Sherlock invites Watson to come to the Diogenes Club. And there's some very special rules about that place, like you have to be quiet. If you say anything, you'll be kicked out. That's where Watson meets Sherlock's brother, Mycroft. And Sherlock and Mycroft have this little back and forth about this person across the street. And Watson's like, no, shenanigans. There's no way that you got to this kind of a explanation based just upon the what? Come on. There's no way. So they walk him through the logical progression of this is because of this more than likely, this is because of this more than likely. It's just simple human behavior whenever they break it down. And Watson is kind of like, this is still just postulation. So at least finally he's given a little bit of lip back to him. It's about time he got over his man crush and started to be himself more. Okay, so we have this little scene happening. Mycroft wants to run something by Sherlock, wants to introduce him to a client. It is a Greek interpreter. He's a very well-known individual. This individual usually is employed by hotels and other places. And our Greek interpreter's name is Milos. I hope I'm saying that right. I think I am. Milos, one evening, gets contracted by a gentleman, Harold Latimer, to go to a house supposedly in Kensington. Now, this is kind of where the oddness begins in this story, because inside of the buggy that they're in, the windows are papered over. There's these drastic curtain treatments that have been done to it, and Milos starts to feel a little uncomfortable. He's like, makes me kind of think you don't want me to know where I'm going. And that's where it does go off kilter quite a bit, really, all at once, because the gentleman in the cart, he's all, you see this? You see this stick? I could beat you unconscious with it. Bah-ha-ha. I paraphrase, but that was it was a threat of stay quiet, don't say anything, and you don't need to know where you're going. So they end up taking him through these big loops here and here and here and here and here and here before finally getting to the final destination. So there's a little bit of oddness. 2 hours into the future, after getting into the buggy, he gets to an estate, and that estate is really dark. He can't really give any superior details about what the place would look like, colorations of things. And whenever he gets ushered into the house is incredibly dark too. And inside of that house, in a meeting room, is Harold Latimer that we just mentioned, and we find out later on, I believe, that his name was Wilson Kemp, but he's the guy that is the giggler. Now, Milos, being a inquisitive gentleman, gets hounded by these two, Latimer and Kemp, that he will never speak of what happens here. He will only say and interpret for this one thing only. And don't try any trickery. Don't try to do anything, because we'll know. The whole thing that tipped off Milos that maybe things weren't on the up and up was that there was this emaciated individual that was brought in. And the guy had plaster pretty much all over his face to keep him quiet. It was a sticking plaster. It's a little bit different from what people think of a plaster these days. I think of plaster, I think of a wall, or paper mache, but more of a hardening wax from what I read up. Could be completely wrong on that. If I am, call me out on it. So as he is interpreting, there's these odd questions of, you will lose all of this. You will have no right to this. You will give this to such and such. And it's almost unclear what they are talking about, but in the 1800s, it was actually fairly commonplace for a woman to still have dowries. Whenever she was getting married, her husband would take over the finance because men are better at, whatever. I've met women that can do far more with money than any dude could ever do, but that's just me. Anyhow, so he's with this lady, and he's asking all these really odd questions, but he gets an idea. Go Milos. And the idea is that he's going to start tagging his own questions at the end of the questions. Now, the guy with the sticking plaster on his face, he was known as a different name than his actual name. At this point, when Sophie comes into the room and Paul starts getting the wax off of his face, then things are kind of thrown into the air, and Milos is escorted back out to the coach and took and dropped off. So he's confounded. He doesn't really know what's going on, why he was there. He kind of figures that maybe it has to do with marriage, but he's not 100% certain. Hence him employing Mycroft, and then Mycroft getting out of Sherlock. Now, some investigation starts to happen in the background. It's found out quite by accident that Sophie is kind of known by this other person, the investigator, and that she's residing not where Milos thought he went, but instead in Beckingham. Now, during this inspection, Milos comes up missing. He was warned not to talk. He was warned not to tell anybody because these people had their own ways of finding things out. The group being Watson, Sherlock, and Detective Inspector Gregson, the whole group goes to the house in Beckham. And whenever they get there, they find that the place is abandoned. There's nothing there, but there are some tracks leading away, which look really recent. Eventually, they find a closed room, and in the closed room is Milos and Sophie's brother. Quite apparently, Sophie and Paul, that's what I'm going to call them now, had gotten into a spot of trouble with Latimer. And he was trying to forcibly take property and money away from the two, which were brother and sister. Now, fortunately, through the questioning session that he had gone through, Credides never really signed anything over because he never signed anything. However, with that being said, there were some more reports of Latimer and Kemp traveling with a woman whenever they were killed. It was speculated by the papers that they had just gotten into a fight amongst themselves and killed each other. However, upon closing of this publication, Sherlock says something to Watson, which kind of put it more into a different light that I appreciated even more. That being that Sophie had probably finally exacted revenge upon the two for what had been done to her and her brother. On to the second one, which is the adventure of the Naval Treaty. In this one, Watson starts the story by handing Sherlock a letter from an old schoolmate of his, a Mr. Percy Phelps. And in this letter, well, hang on, before we go on, Percy Phelps, to me, really seems to be a Weasley, incompetent, stammering, stuttering excuse of an individual. There wasn't anything in the text for the dialogue of the character of Phelps that would suggest this, but that's just the way my head wrapped around that character. I'm curious to see if you guys have done the same thing, or if it's just me really not liking that person because they skipped their station. Mr. Percy Phelps' dilemma is that he's been passed out from brain fever. You know, there's a lot of brain fever in these books. I mean, it's like everybody had the excuse of brain fever. I would like to try that one day. I'm going to call in with brain fever and see how far it gets me. So he's been asleep because he was too delicate to do anything for 9 weeks. And upon awaking, he has somebody transcribe a letter for him to send to Watson, explaining that he was tasked a very important job with a particular document. This document was an entreaty of how things were going to happen in between Britain and France, and it was very political in nature, and if it got into the wrong hands, it could be very damaging because of it's like a contingency plan is what I got from it. But he wanted some coffee, and poor Precious had ate too much food and was getting sleepy, and he didn't realize how big of a job it was going to be. And whenever he rang the bell, somebody came to get him some coffee, but they never showed up. So he got up, he left this important document on a desk in the middle of a room, unguarded, and left. Good for him. I really didn't like this character, if you can't tell. Now, I did like the story, though. The story was pretty solid. So he goes down to find out where his coffee at, and while he's talking to the gentleman that's downstairs, he finds the commissioner asleep. But while he's down there, questioning the commissioner about where's my coffee at, the bell rings, and the commissioner asks Mr. Phelps, hey, if you're down here, how could that bell ring? And so the game was afoot. They go up to the large room of which he was copying the document. The original was gone, and only his copied portion was remaining. And this is where a lot of backtracking and this, that, and the other starts to happen in the story. The commissioner was trying to divert Phelps so that the commissioner's wife could escape. And that was kind of obvious. So Phelps ends up with a police officer with him, and he calls in some deputies and this, that, and the other. And they end up chasing through the streets just 4 or 5 minutes after the paper disappeared, the commissioner's wife. And the entire time, the commissioner's like, no. Hey, psst, let's go this way. Let's go down this way instead. There's nothing over there. That's just where we live. No, don't worry about that. Let's go this way instead. Which, it was kind of comical and pitiful in a way. And I have actually seen that kind of behavior in people. So it was realistic. They end up going to the commissioner's house, and her daughter is in there. And they end up waiting for her, and waiting. And finally she shows up, and they made an error. Instead of opening the door and nabbing the woman, they let her daughter answer the door, and she tells them there's 2 men in the house. She runs around the side, and then they find her in the kitchen. There's a lot of things that point here, or point here, or point here. There's, in fact, a little bit too much detail. A lot of the times in Sherlock publications that I've read so far, there's a hint of this, there's a hint of that, there's a little subtlety here, but this was very blatantly open, or so it seemed. Now, upon figuring out that the commissioner's wife indeed actually did not have that paper, everything came rushing in on Mr. Phelps, and oh goodness, Mr. Phelps got the vapors and passed out from brain fever for 9 weeks. Watson and Sherlock start going over the case with Mr. Phelps, and they see the same things that I had seen, where it was like there's just too much that's really prominent here. There's too much going on. But there's some excitement that's found by Mr. Phelps while Sherlock is investigating, and that is on the first night that Phelps was to be by himself, somebody tries to break into the room he's in. So some more investigations into Mr. Phelps' house finds that there's a individual that's been living there that had a unfortunate turn in the stock market and has pretty well lost everything and is incredibly desperate to improve his situation. And that individual gets caught by Sherlock because Sherlock puts on a ruse. It was a very enjoyable thing to watch, the way that he had this person do something, this person do something. He orchestrated the thing very well, and then executed his plan. Now that evening, Sherlock sends Watson and Mr. Phelps to the Baker Street house. And in the morning, whenever he arrives, Watson hasn't had a good time with Mr. Phelps because Mr. Phelps is a nincompoop. He's been worrying all evening. He didn't sleep any, and he's been aggravating the fire out of Watson by going on and on and on about what could Sherlock be doing. Will he be back? Anyhow, the long of it all, Sherlock gets off his jollies, which was quite fun to watch. So they sit down to eat breakfast because Sherlock is famished. He's had 30 miles of bad air in between him where he's at now and where he was at. So he's pulled a prank is what it amounts to. He's trying to get Mr. Phelps to open up a food dome in front of him, but he's not playing along very well because he's such a timid and precious little thing. So Sherlock eventually tires of it, and he's like, hey, look, can you help me? I want what's in there. Just open that up. He opens it up, and the papers are there, and the very excitable Mr. Phelps almost dies again. They had to pour bourbon down his throat to bring him back this time, which I think was a pretty good touch, really. And so that ends the adventure of the Naval Treaty. Again, it is a good read. It really, really is. But I just didn't like that one character. But I think that's one of the reasons why it was so good, too. Was because I didn't like that character, but I found myself reading because the story was pretty awesome, really. On to the last one of the memoirs. And this one is The Final Problem. Notice it's not the adventure of the final problem. It is just the final problem. For me, it's the first time that I've actually been introduced to Professor Moriarty. And he seems to be a very dubious character. He seems to be an incredibly intelligent individual as well. Someone that could be a character that, even though he's an antagonist, that a lot of people could side with, in a way, because of his intelligence and his charisma. It starts out fairly grim, because Watson is at his house, and Sherlock pretty well comes blundering in. His knuckles are all busted. He starts closing blinds and asking Watson if he can escape out the back over his fence. And he also wanted to make sure that Watson's wife wasn't home, so that she wouldn't be in danger either. So here comes the bad, right? Sherlock is usually a very open-fronted individual that's not afraid of much of anything, or at least that's the characterizations that I have seen from the author of this character. And he tends to have his chest puffed out all the time, but this time he's deflated and not necessarily running as a scared rabbit would, but he's certainly concerned about things that have been happening around him. Sherlock starts to describe to Watson his issues of what has happened over the last few months, being that he's been setting a trap to get a criminal gang and or a criminal mastermind wrapped up for the good of humanity or for Londoners or whatnot. And he describes pretty much a chess game, really, of back and forth, dodging and parrying, and that whoever was behind all of this, that eventually he clued into, was really, really intelligent, and in fact could be his equal or his better. After he describes who this person could be, this Moriarty, he tells Watson about his only encounter with him, where Moriarty went on the offensive and just shows up at Sherlock's door and gives him pretty much what for. And at that point promises that he will take Sherlock out if Sherlock doesn't just back off. Now, Watson has been listening to this faithfully, as he usually does, so that he can recount the story. And upon the completion of this little interlude with Sherlock, Watson was asked by Sherlock if he would like to accompany Sherlock. And he, of course, agrees. But there's these stipulations. The sparrow flies south while the eagle shakes hands with a volcano, blue 49, or some, just a bunch of random words put together, right? But it was kind of that level of where he would get a ride from this, he would go here, he would time going through the building and departing his wherever he was at to get to this building that he would cross through, so that it would be exactly this time and there would be a coach pulling up, he would hop in and go. Gave him the complete description of the individual, even to the point of if a collar was turned up or down, to get off the continent. Just for a little while. Just for a few days. So that the trap that Sherlock had put into motion, which he didn't have to be there for, would finally close. But unfortunately, in this one, Watson ends up being the weak point. Over the last month and a half, 2 months of doing these videos, I've given Watson a pretty hard way to go. I really have. I do like the character, though. I really honestly do. But, yeah, here's the but. I try not to finish a sentence like that with a but. I usually leave people hanging. So Watson does everything he's supposed to do. He ends up on a train. And while he's on the train, Sherlock surprises him, as he usually does. And, by the way, you know how I've said a few times, I don't think that Arthur Conan Doyle would use the same language these days as he used to? I've been holding off on this until I finished the memoirs, because that way I would have the two big collections out of the way. But I wish I knew exactly how many times Watson ejaculated something. Now granted, back then that would mean exclaim in surprise. It's a good word, it really is. Anyway, so Sherlock surprises Watson, revealing himself behind his disguise. And Watson ejaculates, "Oh, you done it again." That's not what he said, but Watson and Sherlock are on the train. They're getting away. Watson feels like they're pretty safe and secure, but Sherlock puts it out there and says, if Moriarty is as intelligent as I've said he is, and such a good everything, why wouldn't he come to the same conclusions I have? And why wouldn't he beat us to where we're going? In fact, he'll probably track something of ours and meet us there. They were on their way to Brussels, and they had to have a stop at Canterbury. And while they were there, as suspected, a special train, which was just like a one car, came rocketing through the station, as Sherlock suspected. And Sherlock and Watson kind of ducked down behind things as that went by. They eventually make it to Strasbourg. And that Monday, Sherlock does get word that most of Moriarty's gang was indeed arrested. They didn't just stop at Strasbourg, they ended up in Switzerland. While in Switzerland, they're staying in Mergen. And they decide to take a walk. I mean, it's pretty well things are wrapping themselves up. The trap is closing. Moriarty might have gotten away, but then again, he might still be looking for them as well. They decided to take a walk to go visit something locally that was a natural wonder, which was Reichenbach Falls. Now, upon going to this area, it's one of those situations where it's like a sheer cliff on one side and a sheer drop on the other side from that cliff face. There's a young boy that approaches Watson, and the hotel that they were staying at, he's received a message from them saying that there's a sick English woman there and she would like to have an English doctor. And whenever Watson gets back to the hotel, the innkeeper has no knowledge of writing this note. And he goes, "Oh, it's probably that English guy that was here," and describes Moriarty. And this is when Watson realizes he's been A, duped, and B, things are not going to be good when he gets back. Upon returning to where he was with Sherlock, which wasted a entire almost 2.5 to 3 hours, I'm thinking it was like 2 hours of time for him to walk the path, run, and then walk the path back, he found a stick that Sherlock had, and he found a couple of sets of tracks, because he finally employs the things that Sherlock has been trying to teach him over the years of the deductive reasoning, the way of doing the reasoning. The thing that he comes to is not a good ending for Sherlock. Quite apparently, there's 2 sets of tracks that go through that area in one direction but do not come back. And the walking stick was left where Sherlock had been when Watson left. Now, he looks up and happens to notice a small piece of paper, and in that small piece of paper is a note that Sherlock had wrote in his impeccable handship, as Watson said, as if he was sitting at his stationery. That note said pretty much everything that we already knew throughout the story of Moriarty did indeed catch up with him, that Sherlock was trying to express, yes, it is me writing this, in the language that he used in recounting details of which he had already told Watson. But the note effectively came to the end of, yeah, we're probably both going to be gone by the end of this, but at least Moriarty was nice enough to let me write this letter. Watson, after reading that, really honestly speculates that Sherlock and Moriarty had both plummeted off this sheer cliff and were forever in the abyss down below, which broke the man's heart, especially with the way that the letter ended. And now we have it. We have finished the Canticles and Chronicles. The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes and the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. They both fall into one side or the other of that. So when we pick back up with Sherlock, we're going to be, of course, finally starting with the Hounds of Bakersville. The Bakersville Hounds. I know I had a couple of different names depending upon the areas of which it was released in. But that's the one that's going to be the next Sherlock. Now, between now and that Sherlock video, we are going to tackle Dennis E. Taylor's new book, which is The Singularity Trap. I look forward to reading into that. And if you guys haven't got it yet and you want to read it and comment along with me, awesome. You know what to do. Leave me some notes in the description down below. I will, of course, answer them. Now that we are at the end of the video, there's only one thing left to do. That's right. That subscribe button. It should be right in there somewhere. Make sure that you hit it. And since the subscription's absolutely null and void, don't worry about hitting that. Hit the bell instead. That's right. If you happen to see anything in here that you thought was interesting or you like or you want to share, please feel free to do so, because sharing is caring after all. So hit that like button and or share it to a friend or colleague. This has been Shane with Shane's Books and Review. I hope that you guys have had a great day and that you enjoyed the video. Beyond that, I'll see you in the next